Good afternoon. My name is Jason Zimba. I'm Executive Vice President and Chief Academic Officer at Amplify. Earlier, I was founding partner of Student Achievement Partners, and now at Amplify, I lead our work in mathematics. And I'm excited to talk to you today, in particular, about math tutoring. My title today asks, what is the active ingredient in high-dosage tutoring? In education, we often hear medical metaphors. Talking in medical metaphors can make our work sound impressive, scientific, and it's not always bad or inaccurate. But my title today aims to poke a little fun at this tendency in our rhetoric. So, by way of preface, I will start by criticizing the medical metaphor. And now, forgive me for being so literal here, but there are essential differences between, on the one hand, what makes medicines work versus what's going right when education works. To pick just one, consider that medicines work without the patient having to think about it. My wife recently cut her finger, and unfortunately the wound got infected, so she started taking antibiotics for it. Now, as it turns out, my wife is an infectious diseases epidemiologist who studies antibiotic-resistant infections, and as a result of that, she tends to favor policies that would, in some cases, reduce the level of doctors prescribing antibiotics. She considered taking that medicine to be a personal defeat. She was quite literally having to swallow that pill. I, on the other hand, was quite relieved because, after all, I wanted my wife to get better. And the point is, being happy about the medicine or having qualms about taking it could have nothing whatsoever to do with whether the medicine worked. You don't even have to believe in antibiotics in order for them to work. The medicine here is a blood-based delivery system. It circumvents the brain entirely, to say nothing of the mind. And the medicine did work, by the way, I'm happy to say. But education is the opposite of medicine in the sense that it acts entirely via the pathway, if you want to call it that, of thinking. In education, you have to think in order for anything to happen at all. So a deep analysis of what might improve education is going to have to acknowledge, sooner or later, not just quasi-medicinal factors like high dosage and so on, but also the role of conscious thinking, which includes not only disciplinary patterns of knowledge and thought, but also student metacognition and identity formation. And in fact, maybe I had better pause here because I'm focusing my remarks today on mathematics education. And alas, I'm not always sure everyone in America actually thinks of mathematics as education. They may think of it more as a collection of techniques to be picked up. And I admit the situation is confusing because mathematics does include techniques to be picked up, but math is not reducible to those techniques. So let's look at a range of math problems to get a sense of this. First, in the upper left, there is a series of calculations. You could approach these calculations algorithmically, or in many cases apply opportunistic mental strategies. Either way, this task is a lot about technique. Next, below that is a word problem. I'll read it. It says, in a snack shop, there is a frozen yogurt machine. When there is 3 liters of frozen yogurt in the machine is 1/3 full. How much frozen yogurt is in the machine when it is 1/4 full? This task draws on technique, but I think it is not reducible to technique. In the upper right, I wanted to concentrate on item 2, which asks the question, is there a number greater than 1/5 and less than 1/4? If you think so, find such a number. If you think there is no such number, explain why. This question is really about the number system. The number system is an idea, or a lot of nested ideas. I think it's hard to shoehorn it into the category of technique at all. but this is an essential set of ideas for students to be prepared for middle grades and higher level mathematics. Finally, in the lower right, I'll read this one. A scalene triangle is a triangle in which the sides all have different lengths. Thinking about this, Alana decided there should also be a name for quadrilaterals in which the sides all have different lengths. She said, I'll name them after myself. She defined an Alanagon to be a quadrilateral in which four sides all have different lengths. 1, draw an example of an Alanagon. 2, a couple of true or false questions about Alanagons. In this question, we begin to touch on issues of agency, mathematics identity, and academic belonging. Alana has invented a definition, which is to say she has created mathematics. In the numbered items, we explore the territory opened up by that definition. So looking at these 4 tasks together, I'll just repeat that mathematics includes techniques, but is not reducible to them. In every other academic subject, it's understood that if you're not thinking, you're not learning. But somehow when it comes to teaching math, we seem to abandon that academic frame. The picture becomes more like, I don't know, how it is when I'm teaching my daughter how to scramble eggs. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and be sure not to do that. And if I want her to remember the techniques better, I might pad them out with a bit of conceptual material, like maybe about heat and protein molecules or something. A chef at a culinary institute would regard my little mini lectures on eggs as a pretty pathetic form of culinary education. But that said, even the chef at the culinary institute will sometimes just grab the spatula and show a student how to do something. So while education isn't reducible to direct instruction, it contains moments of direct instruction, and these play out on multiple timescales, in the moment teacher decisions, unit planning, grade planning, and the curriculum. Anyway, it's fair to say that although I am not a credentialed or even talented culinary educator, my daughter can scramble a pretty good egg these days, and Dad will take a bit of credit for that. So it's a good thing that we have dads and moms and grandparents, big siblings, and other caretakers who are on call to show kids their way around a stovetop. Imagine if the only way anybody could learn how to make breakfast was to go to culinary school. If you've followed my meandering metaphors, then you will realize that we have found our way back to tutoring, a domain where we do place a wider range of adults and others on call to help kids in the distinctive ways they can. And when you look at tutoring in that light, you begin to wonder why tutoring wasn't already built into our blueprint for public schooling 100 years ago and more, when the parameters were being laid down by state governments. And so while it was the pandemic that put tutoring front and center in education discussions, if you look at trends in state legislatures with the bills being introduced and passed even now in 2023, you do wonder if tutoring might become a more permanent fixture of the American public school. If so, then it's important to build it the right way from the beginning. Here are important dimensions that are known to underlie the success of tutoring programs, as established by various studies and meta-studies. I'll walk through them quickly. Other speakers today will probably also explicate these. They have to do with the frequency of the tutoring, how many students are in a group, who's doing the tutoring, who are the tutors. They go on. Measurement is about using data and informal assessment to adjust and to know how things are working. Relationships between the tutors and the pupils matter. The curriculum, that it be of high quality, that it be linked to what's happening in school. Likewise, mechanical factors like scheduling and whether this happens during the school day or right after or separately, the virtual or in-person delivery, and who is identified or invited or selected to participate in the tutoring. These factors from research are a very useful guide to designing tutor programs, and at Amplify, we're proud to work with the National Student Support Accelerator, NSSA, and we are supporting school districts in the field right now with literacy tutoring. During school year 22-23, we provided tutoring to approximately 18,000 students across a diversity of districts and provided tutoring materials to a couple 100,000 students who are being tutored by district hired staff. And consistent with the design principles we looked at, the tutors receive ongoing development and training. They meet with students multiple times a week, and the tutors use ongoing data, informal assessment, and build a trusting relationship with the pupils. And because of district requests, we're now beginning to design math tutoring supports for districts. And an initial focus for us there is word problems. Remember, we looked at the frozen yogurt machine problem. Word problems are significant in the curriculum. Success in word problems is linked to future success in algebra. Word problems have opportunities to improve students' comprehension of fractional quantities and operations by bootstrapping the operations from whole numbers to fractions, and they provide opportunities for practice and calculation. So it's a worthy focus for the academics of the math tutoring. We find that district needs are highly diverse in terms of structure. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. It ranges for us from full service to consultancies. The district settings are all complex. They're each complex in their own way. I wanted now also to go back and explain the source of the mathematical tasks that we looked at earlier. Math Milestones is a nonprofit initiative of Student Achievement Partners, which I co-founded when I was there, along with John Staley and Elizabeth Meyer. The initiative is still housed at SAP, and the core resources are shown here. So in the upper left, we have a grade level grid. This is the math of your grade on a single page. About a dozen problems that cover the bases in many different dimensions at once of what's happening with grade level mathematics. For each problem, there is a student-facing worksheet or handout of it, and also brief teacher notes that talk about the central math concepts in the problem, of course, give the answer and other resources related to the problem, clues about student thinking, and ways to extend the problem. So these core resources are free and available on the mathmilestones.org website, and SAP offers further resources to teachers and districts. At Amplify, we think this resource has promise for tutoring, especially when combined with our unique capabilities in digital curriculum. And we're currently working with a foundation on fleshing out some of these possibilities, so more on that another day. And with our tutoring, we have built out and are building out our tutoring supports in light of what matters for high-dosage tutoring, but that still leaves the question we started with. What is the active ingredient? The very utility of the policy research on high-dosage tutoring presents a curious situation in terms of the perennial problem of translating research into practice. Namely, where did the problem go? It's almost too easy. Ordinarily, the situation in education research is that we have some lab findings or cognitive psychology findings, some fundamental learning science, even some findings from neuroscience or brain imaging. And the task is to perceive the relevance, if any, of this fundamental science for public education in the large. In the case of high-dosage tutoring, however, we have all these policy findings conveniently packaged up for us. But what we don't have, I think, is a clear understanding of the mystery at the center. What is the active ingredient? You probably realize by now that I won't attempt an answer to this question. My goal today is to interest you in it. I have two reasons why you might be interested. A decade ago, many dollars and much political capital were spent in enacting policy research on teacher effectiveness. The effect sizes being published were eye-catching, but over the years, as researchers kept asking what accounted for those effect sizes, the research only gave us a series of null results. The mystery at the center of teaching a classroom full of students was not explicated then. And to be clear, I'm not at all equating the policy or the political prospects of tutoring with those of teacher effectiveness, but tutoring is expensive. It requires appropriations. And to justify that public investment, I think we will do better if we not only argue for what works, but can also explain credibly why what works, works. The second reason I will offer to be interested in understanding the active ingredient in high-dosage tutoring is that education is not only the chase for certain policy outcomes. It is one of the profoundest activities that humans do. The teacher-student relationship is one of the profoundest relationships that humans have. And when it comes to tutoring, you might say we are looking at education in one of its purest forms, a direct meeting of minds. I think of that thrilling moment when, as a tutor, you know you're breaking through with your pupil. What is the spark that jumps between the tutor and the pupil at those moments? I say spark, reaching this time for electricity in my metaphors, because at a moment in my own tutoring practice when that happens, I can always feel the hair on my arm stand up. So as Amplify builds out more and more tutoring supports for districts, building according to the principles we know from research, I will also be looking to understand over time what unfolds at the place wherever two minds meet over a mathematical problem. Thank you. I have some contact information here, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm joined today by Alana Phelan, the Vice President for Tutoring at Amplify, who is an expert in this literature and also, of course, an expert in the tutoring that's happening today out in the field through Amplify with our district partners. And very happy to read and respond to some questions. And one of them was, I think, about the Math Milestones resource, the grids that were there. To my knowledge, at this point, there is not suggested progression or sequence for those problems. SAP has been building more and more resources around the grids and the tasks, including asset maps and some other really interesting work that I've seen them present at conferences. So I think mathmilestones.org would be the best place to learn more about what is available today. Melissa, thanks for this question. The structure of a tutoring session. Alana, do you want to talk about the different ways we structure tutoring? I know that most of our practice here is in literacy, but if there's anything that's general enough for a math audience.
Sure. And good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're tuning in from. Great to be here with you. I think Melissa is asking if the Math Milestones resources suggest the structure of a tutoring session, Jason, and there's nothing specific to that resource that suggests that, right?
Right.
But Melissa, in terms of what we do today with Amplify tutoring in the field, our sessions are typically 30-minute sessions that ties back to some of the research around dosage. We're having consistent, frequent sessions of at least 30 minutes often has made a difference in the research. And in terms of structure, we always do train our tutors to build a little bit of that connection at the beginning, just as you would when you're entering a meeting as an adult, right? You want to feel connected to the folks that you're about to engage in with the next 30 minutes. So there's small time for our tutors to build that personal relationship, make a connection. Our tutors are consistently working with the same small group of students over and over. And then they get right into practice together. Speaking about our literacy structure specifically, students are engaging in multiple different forms of practice related to the same strategic instructional skill. So to get concrete, for instance, they might be learning a new letter sound, and then they practice identifying pictures of words that have that sound. They might then identify actual written words that include that sound at the beginning of the sound. And they go through multiple ways of practicing that skill. And the idea is to try to give students multiple at-bats. We're not expecting mastery in a single tutoring session, but rather getting our students engaged, getting them actively talking, practicing, and hopefully having multiple at-bats. I'm looking down, I see another question here around where have you seen high dosage tutoring work? And are there any great models out there that districts should be looking to? I think this goes back to the part of the presentation where Jason shared, we have seen a gamut of implementations happening across the country as districts have started to turn to high dosage tutoring to help their students get back on track. But a couple places stand out. In particular, just recently, there have been chalkbeat articles around the CPS tutor corps. And I think it's a really interesting model for districts to look at because Chicago Public Schools has recruited locally from the community for in-person tutors. And then they've partnered with tutoring providers, including Amplify and also Saga, to help equip those tutors with researched back materials, training to make sure they're really ready to use those materials. And I think it's a really interesting model because it's letting Chicago provide in-person tutoring with local people from the community who can build connections with their students. They've then seen additional sort of positive side effects of that, where some of the tutors are then joining the school staff in a more permanent position beyond tutoring. And it's helped them scale really rapidly, all the while using, again, research-backed, data-driven materials to make sure that what tutors are doing during that time is highly effective. So I think that's a great model for folks to look more into if they haven't yet, and it's replicable for smaller districts as well as large ones like Chicago in terms of recruiting locally, but finding others to help provide those research-backed materials and training.
Alana, I was going to ask if you or recommend the organization Accelerate as a place where people can learn more about this. Have you worked with any of the folks at Accelerate, Kevin Huffman or Nakia Towns or Kimberly?
Yes, great question. I think both Accelerate comes to mind as well as the National Student Support Accelerator, or NSSA, that you mentioned in your presentation, Jason. Mm-hmm. As many of you tuning in might know, NSSA has helped aggregate resources and research from across the field when it comes to high dosage tutoring. It's a great site to check out. And then Accelerate is a national nonprofit that's helping to ensure that tutoring is effective and that effective models are here to stay and are scaling. We at Amplify are a grant recipient of Accelerate and engage in the Accelerate community of practice along with other tutoring providers and districts. And would definitely encourage you to look into the research as well as the providers that are participating in the Accelerate community as well.
A couple of questions about research and measurement. There was a time when, with the What Works Clearinghouse and so on, when people would only listen to a randomized control trial and they wouldn't look at information from other sources. But then information began to be a construct and say, what information can we get from this data set? And realizing that every data set has information content. And the question, among the questions, would be how to appropriately or validly learn from that and generalize from that. And obviously, some study designs permit much greater generalization than others. the there's never in my experience a study that solves a problem for you, whether because it happened at a finite time and place, or because the real issues are infinitely complex in practice. So the I don't look at only certain categories of research. I look at what any given piece of research has reliably to tell me, or has validly to tell me. And it might be more, might be less, depending on the design. But in terms of, say, research that's based on assessment, the other question from Kimberly here is evaluating aspects of learning that aren't easily measured. That's very important to do, and it doesn't mean that measures like NAEP or others that precipitated this conference are not important. They are extremely important, but they shouldn't be the end of the program of knowing what students know in mathematics. To say nothing of knowing how students think and all that can do to improve the teaching and learning of mathematics. In fact, we have a grant to think about some of these questions to enrich the ways in which we might, as an entire country, know what math is happening, where and when and by whom. So I think as technology continues to accelerate exponentially every year, we should not stop thinking about that question. What's easy to do in 5 years won't be the same as what's easy to do today. And the question of knowing what students know, looking at Melissa's question here in the chat, is only one dimension of what is worth knowing about a student. The student's math identity, the productive disposition, and the other aspects that go into being a successful student and being allowing this discipline of mathematics to do for us the things that it can do. It's a multidimensional question in the Amplify Desmos math curriculum design. Because of the digital platform that we have, we are able to be, to some extent, in conversation with students, and they can tell us things that speak to their growing mathematics identity. And I think there's only room to do more and more of that over time.
I'll build on that question slightly, taking it in the literacy direction with our literacy tutoring. And we have partnered in that context, again, with the National Student Support Accelerator, or NSSA. The bigger question we were actually looking at is, are there ways to optimize tutor-student matching that lead to greater outcomes in student achievement and or greater changes in students' mindsets when it comes to the literacy side of things. So thinking of themselves as readers, having confidence in themselves in reading. We are still conducting that research with them, but in that context, we surveyed students at multiple times a year around things such as, did they feel connected to their tutor? Did they feel cared for during tutoring? But also things like, do they see themselves as a reader? And do they think that with practice, they can get better at reading, to explore some of these questions? And we're really interested to see, as we complete that research study, are there ways that by matching students and tutors of various backgrounds, profiles, experiences, can we optimize for that better? We welcome any other questions.
Let me ask you a question, Alana.
Sure.
In my presentation, I expressed some optimism that tutoring would find a real foothold in the structure of American schooling. I've heard others say we're entering an age of austerity, and this will not have a permanent place. It will be a pandemic blip. Do you ever think about that? What do you think about that?
Great question. It is certainly a question that's on the minds, I think, of our district partners and state education agency partners. And it is on my mind as someone who works at Amplify Tutoring. I am optimistic about the question, Jason. I don't think any of us has a crystal ball, but I'm optimistic. And I think that the organization you mentioned earlier, like Accelerate, is helping to bring the field together in a way that's productive, right? Helping to engage, again, this community of partners and community of districts in thinking about what is working and helping to fund research into what is working so that we can make the case that high impact tutoring is effective, like we've seen it be with our district partners at Amplify Tutoring. And ultimately, what we hear from our district partners is that they want to invest in what works. So even though they might be facing a reduction in financial resources as ESSER goes away, they have other funding sources and they want to put those to the places where they're getting the best results. And the trick goes back to, the question underlying your presentation, just how do we help substantiate that tutoring is one of those interventions that is really getting results.
I notice in some schools that the school has just invested in a culture of students helping students or one-on-one time with teachers. And it strikes me that there might be an equitable need to, if this is really actually happening in higher performing schools, then it's almost an under the radar way in which we're investing more in some students than in other students, and that there is an equitable interest in providing the full range of educational supports.
Yes.
Everywhere.
Yes, I think that really resonates with me. I think it takes me to a place of thinking about how high impact tutoring or high dosage tutoring is not easy to launch. It takes planning, it takes thought. And to your point, Jason, it might be at times that schools that had greater centralized resources had more means to stand up, for instance, peer-to-peer tutoring, and already had this going under the radar long before high dosage tutoring recently garnered lots of national attention for all schools. I see a new question.
Question from David about the American idea of being a math person or not being a math person and how that relates to tutoring. And one thing that makes me think about is the threat to identity that can come from being in a tutoring program. I used the word invited into a tutoring program during my presentation intentionally as an alternative to ideas of being placed in or being sentenced to tutoring. Sometimes to be in any place of a pullout or a structure like that could carry a message of deficit or inadequacy or a problem to be solved. And when I tutor, one of the most important things that I try to do early on is to completely smash any such thinking. In my first session with someone, I will often announce that we are only going to look at problems from 3 grades ahead. Now, I've chosen those problems very carefully so that they have clear touch points with the mathematics that's on the agenda at the grade level. But by announcing that and by looking at those things, I'm able to dissolve a lot of the identity threat or the suggestion that this is a person who is broken in some way, because I don't believe that. And it helps me a lot if I can get past that early on.
We welcome any other questions. Oh, here we go. Seeing some more come in. Jason, would you like to respond to the first one? I think this discussion gets at the idea.
Yeah. I think a lot of ineffable, intangible things happen in a tutoring session. One is that the student is witnessing an adult who has a relationship with math, who might not necessarily be employed in that capacity. So in other words, to be tutored by a member of the community or another adult or a student who has graduated from high school or whoever it may be, to see that that person has a working relationship with math and that they're not just doing it because it's an assignment somewhere, but that person has ideas about math and relationship to it, is one of the things that is happening. And to sort of lift this out of the grind of the day-to-day, the standardized test, the what's next in the curriculum, all of which has to operate and function. But tutoring puts math in a different light, in a different situation. And so curiosity, though in a tutoring session, they might see the adult scratch their head and say, wait a minute, I have to think that through. And without teaching it, what the student is learning there is that you can do math without a recipe book, that you can use your thinking and put together things you know in order to come to something, and that it's not just a game of, wait, I remember how the teacher told me how to do this one. It's that it's a thinking subject.
I know we're going to get short on time, so I'll quickly turn to advice for districts and this question about in-day versus after school. We've mentioned these organizations, but I think starting with the National Student Support Accelerator site, as well as Accelerate, is a great place to get grounded in resources for tutoring as districts think about, are they ready to take this on? And I would just point to trying to get focused. So are there particular grades based on data, particular subject areas where a district is first trying to launch tutoring? We have a lengthy consulting series that we can engage in with districts that are really interested, and we help them design their own tutoring programs. But the short, snappy answer is go to NSSA. And then we do always advise our district partners to try to make tutoring happen during the school day whenever possible, because it makes it more equitable. We know students can participate if it's happening during the day. Only some may be able to get there before or after school. At the same time, we realize that not all schools can free up their schedule and make changes depending on when they're launching in the year to make tutoring available. So if you're launching, for instance, second semester, you might start by launching with tutoring after school and strive for it to fit into the schedule during the school year for the following school year. So we meet districts where they are.
Thanks, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you, everyone.